Oh, I can't hear you, Matt. You're muted.
Goodness.
Now I can hear you.
All right. Thank you. So we're learning this this new piece of software. I'm going to introduce everybody. All right, we're going to add everybody in here.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes. All right, we've got everybody. Thank you guys for joining. Good morning, everybody who's just tuning in. I'm Matt, managing partner from Factorial Capital. All of our partners are technical founders backing the next generation of technical talent. This event came together really organically. I was talking with the founder of Flower AI, Daniel, about kind of what's happening with engineering in open source, and when we talked about open source business models, and everybody I talked to, including the people I'm about to introduce, were just sort of interested in getting everyone in the community together. So I'm very excited to have you all. The members of this is going to be a day-long like AI filibuster with a bunch of people presenting really cool AI native open source products. This first group of people, thank you guys so much for joining. You guys basically need no introduction. I will just share how I know you. At my last firm, BetaWorks, we were the first investor in Huggingface. That's how I got to know Clem, and he's now a partner with me at Factorial. Factorial is an investor in Robin's, and I should say that Huggingface is the largest open source AI community where models are released. I think at this point, almost everyone knows about all of your companies. Rob and I met, we're investors in his company, Black Forest Labs, which to me, one of the things interesting about Black Forest Labs is it's an open source first company with a real business model. So I'm really curious to talk about that. And then Erik runs Modal. We're also an investor there, where Modal, I think, is probably the most popular place to serve custom AI models at scale. And it was used to build some of my favorite companies. I use Suno nearly every day, and I think that Suno has said they were built there. So thank you guys all for joining today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
So I've been thinking about a bunch with open source, but I think to start with, I would love to just go around the horn. Why does open source matter to you? And maybe we can, for you guys are kind of around this way. So from my perspective, at least, we'll maybe start with Clem. This is a huge movement. Why is it important to you?
Yeah. So I think for me, open source is really, really important because it accelerates progress, right? I think if you look at the progress of the AI field, especially from 2016 to maybe 2020, most of it was driven by open science and open source, right? If you think of the T in GPT, ChatGPT, it's transformers, right? The open research from Google. So it accelerates progress first, and then it distributes both kind of the capabilities, the control, and the economic benefit of AI to everyone, which in my opinion is very important for foundational technology like that. You don't really want AI to be controlled just by one or two players, especially big ones. You want it to be distributed to everyone and kind of unleash tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of startups, of companies everywhere that can build with AI, and that's powered by open source.
Around on this side, maybe actually Robin next, even though it's not in the order of me. Can you talk about why open source matters to you, and maybe even specifically to Black Forest Labs?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think open source, to answer that question, first of all, I can only second what Clem said. I think that's all very true. I think I personally connect open source with science. Science is happening in the public. Ideally, you have open review processes of papers that then extends to source code of models, model weights. I think it helps making the whole field more transparent, more reproducible, more verifiable, actually achieving real progress. And that's why I think it's fundamentally important that even if we now move into more advanced AI scenarios, that the open source component stays alive, and I think it becomes even more relevant. To us at Black Forest Labs, to me personally, it matters quite a lot because my career has been entangled with open source quite a bit. I started this basically while I was doing my PhD at a university. It was quite kind of natural for us to publish everything openly. And then, that mechanism kicked in. We saw that it got a lot of traction. We saw that a lot of development was happening on top of the stuff that we were releasing that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't released model weights, for example. And to us as a company, it also matters because, look, this is an insanely competitive field. I think if you want to put yourself on the radar, you have to do some things that maybe if you are like in, let's say, Google's shoes, don't have to do. So I think it can serve as a marketing instrument. But then again, like it provides real value. It kind of serves the purpose that the Flux models, it's like text-to-image models that we have released, really build a fundamental basis for the field and kind of serve as the infrastructure on which the development is happening. And that's also what we as a company see as like a good value proposal, actually, because we do license open weight models to customers, and then they can they get a commercial license for these weights, and they can also incorporate all the development that is happening on top of the open weights into their products. I think that's a really nice value proposition.
That, I mean, it's interesting. So Clem's talking about compounding value of just getting, like, accelerating the speed of actual science, and you're talking about that too. Then you also mentioned something different that Clem and I have discussed in the past too, which is the attention piece of this, right? Like, how do you, in a world where we have, you just mentioned Google doesn't necessarily need to do this, but how do you get attention for the thing that you're building? And open source seems like it's, because it's so community driven, has that. And I wonder, Erik, I'm curious about your take on open source, but also when I first used Modal, the very first thing I did was I think I spun up like a stability image. So like getting attention for open source is from developers is also, when I show up on Modal, what are the images that I can see? How do you kind of think about first of all, what do you think about, how are you kind of thinking about open source, but also how do you guys pick which libraries you're sort of featuring?
Yeah, I can start with the first question. What I think about open source, I think it's a fantastic way to share progress and collaborate on things. I'm the author of a bunch of open source projects, and for me, it's been a great way to work with other people. Most of them are like 10 years ago, but I built a vector database and a workflow engine and some other stuff. I think as a business model, I think I have like a slightly different take or actually like not a different take. I think it's hard. I think it only, as much as I love open source as a way to create all these like positive externalities, I think as a business model, it's a little bit trickier. I think it works in certain cases where the distribution advantage works very much in your favors. I think both Robin and Clem are like great examples of that. The fact that you can create something that millions of people use, I think now you're in a great position to then kind of figure out how to monetize it. But it does inherently make it a little bit harder to monetize it. Modal is not open source. Like, we went for a more direct monetizable approach where we said, we'll just run all the code for people, and that's what we're going to monetize. And that's a little bit harder in terms of getting distribution, but easier in terms of monetization. So I generally think that's, and I think the Databricks CEO Ollie always says this, like, it's like in order to succeed with open source, you need like two home runs. First, you need to make a successful open source project, and then you need to figure out how to monetize it. I think both of you here are like very good at monetizing it, luckily, so it worked out in your case. But like when I started Modal, we made the decision to not go an open source route because of that reason, because it is harder. To answer your second question, I think it's interesting to see on the model side that I think what happened like 5-10 years ago with open source world was like, there wasn't really like a precedent for like infrastructure as a service or like SaaS in the same way. So the main reason to get distribution of software was to open source it. Then I think what ended up happening was like, people just realized like, oh, we can put it behind an API, or we can put it behind, turn it into like a commercial startup and use infrastructure as a service. And so I actually think that went away a little bit. Like open source became a little less prevalent as a business model. It's been interesting to see on the model side. I think it's kind of going through a similar shift where with models, distribution is hard because everyone has their own runtime and run in different infrastructure. So I think to me that explains a lot why we've seen this like explosion in open source model. And I think it really works in favor of distribution for those companies. Sorry, I'm like rambling.
No,
what I was going to say was,
yeah.
I love that because it means like there's a lot of stuff out there that we can run on Modal.
So I would love for you all, for Clement and Robin to chime in on that, because what I'm hearing you say, Erik, is open source is freemium, right? Like, I mean, this exists. You had hit with Facebook too, right? Like you had to make the app that people use, and then you had to figure out if it was a decent business model behind it. So many of the consumer apps, I think, over the last 15 years have had that multiple home run necessity. And maybe, like, how do you all think about it as Robin and Clement, as you guys were figuring out what your business model? I saw it closer with Clem, sort of that evolution, but how did you guys think about maybe experimenting towards what your business model was? And as you guys are sort of, if you were a startup asking you guys for advice, how do I figure out how to try? I want this to be open source. How did it come to be?
I think what's interesting in open source is that you have to be very strategic with your business model so that it doesn't run counter to your whole purpose of open sourcing, right? That's why you see a lot of companies that start as open source and then become closed source, because they basically build the monetization that counters the incentives of open sourcing, right? So at Huggingface, something we've always been intentional with is trying to build the incentives for us to push more open source rather than less. And that's kind of like a main driver why we build the platform in that way. Basically, the more open source there is, the more usage there will be, and with a freemium model, the more monetization we're going to be able to generate. So you create this kind of like virtuous cycle of monetization that pushes you even further into your vision. We're probably more proponents of open source today than we were 5 years ago when we started. Whereas for most companies, it's sometimes the opposite journey, even if sometimes they come back, right? OpenAI is a good example of that, where they're doing more like the roller coaster of open source and openness, I guess. But the cool thing is that now you're starting to have so many examples of that, like, of course, Robin with Black Forest, but also older ones, like you mentioned, Erik. Databricks, of course, is a great example of an open source monetized company. And you have countless of other examples with the Mongo, Elastic of this world, and dozens of others. So you can get inspired by them and adapt that for the AI world.
Yeah, and maybe to add to Matt what you said, I wouldn't say that we have figured it out, right? Like I wouldn't say that like in this AI world, a lot of companies have actually figured out how they monetize, right? But we are experimenting. I think we did a successful initial experiment when we, to Erik's point, released Flux and the open source component. We also released like a proprietary version of that, which was more powerful and maintaining that gradient, protecting some of your core IP, while also tapping into that distribution potential of open source. I think that's kind of the art to figure out, and we decided to do this via model distillation, which allows to do all of these things: IP protection, making something more efficient available, and that so far has been successful. Let's see how it turns out in the future.
I'm actually curious if I can ask you, Robin. Like, I think for Clem, I think your business model is very obvious because you're so community focused. Like, there's kind of a clear network effect. I think open source is kind of a no-brainer. For you, Robin, I think it's like a less obvious choice. So, like, you could have built an API, you could have focused on like kind of a vertical consumer product, but you did instead, which I think is a fascinating choice, and it seems to have worked out really well to do the freemium approach of licensing models. And also releasing open source models. I'm kind of curious if there was like a particular reason why you decided to go down that route.
I know, to be clear, we actually also built an API, which is.
So you do all three business models. That's
exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. So basically we took the model family and we, along the axis of different degrees of distillation that you can do, basically separated into completely open source, Apache license, right? Some open weight licensing business model, and then the most powerful one into the API. And now we are expanding, experimenting quite a bit with these different axes. But yeah, to your point, Matt, this requires some experimentation, of course. But it has been, quite the, I would say, distribution advantage. It's obviously very hard to measure because we cannot create an alternative reality. But yeah.
What's interesting maybe is that sometimes we see open source as this kind of like a naive, idealistic thing, which it is, right? I think it aligns well with a lot of our values. But what people sometimes don't realize is that open source is actually the biggest competitive tool. It's really like it's a tool that have been used forever by companies to compete, especially when they're not in the lead, right? It's like the classic playbook of Android competing with iOS, with open source. It's like Llama, competing with kind of like proprietary models and making them kind of like a commodity. So interestingly, open source is a great way to compete and to do things differently. So when you think about startups, right, they need to compete, right? They need to do things differently than other companies, especially to emerge in AI, where you have so much noise and so much kind of like power from the big technology companies. And so for a lot of them, including Black Forest, open source is actually a way to compete and to do things differently than what a big player would do.
Yeah.
That being said, I think you're actually in the best position if you compete in both areas, right? You provide the state-of-the-art overall and also the state-of-the-art open source model. But that's, of course, very hard to achieve. And then,
I think to Clem's point. Sorry, go ahead.
I think you should always look, like when you design these models, when you release something, I don't know, an API product around it, look at the best possible open source alternative, because that's what you're ultimately also competing with.
I was going to say to Clem's point, I think it actually I think the go-to-market side is fascinating, and I realize like we're actually all European founders, and we're also none of us in Silicon Valley. So I wonder if that also plays a role. Like I feel like the go-to-market side, it's harder to do like top-down enterprise sales when you're outside Silicon Valley. And I wonder if, we didn't choose the open source route, but we went very heavily on like product-led growth. And you two went very heavy on like open source growth and product-led growth. And I think that also maybe plays a role is actually just like the fact that none of us are in Silicon Valley. Yeah.
After all, the ultimate open source playbook of the last few weeks has been DeepSeek from China, right? So that also
that's a good point.
Validates this.
And what's your, since we're talking about Silicon Valley and open source outside of that, what's your sense of, we now have OpenAI that was open, as we all know, and now is
closed AI.
And that was closed AI. And now we think it's going to be open again. I have not seen any
Ajar AI.
What's the logic there? Is that like, look, they're just burning too many GPUs, and so they need to figure out a way to, is it a recognition of the fact these models are only relevant for so long? Or what's your sense?
My feeling is that OpenAI is more focused on like vertical end-to-end products, and their like API business is like less of a focus. That wasn't the case a couple of years ago, but my feeling is like it's like less strategically important for them, and for that reason they're more cool with just like open sourcing things and kind of letting people pick it up.
Yeah, I agree. They actually started to open source some things, I think yesterday or the day before when they did their announcement. They have, I think, the second most trending data set on Huggingface right now, with like a long context benchmark data set. So it's really interesting to see them coming back to the right side of history, as Sam Hartman said.
I appreciate y'all joining. We have a couple more minutes. I have one other topic that I was really curious to get your all's take on, which is, my sense is that AI native, you guys are all what I would call like AI native. You guys started your careers, I would imagine, over the since 2016, I know for Clement and for you guys, I'm not as certain, but doing AI, doing non-AI things. But then for the last few years, it sort of have that focus as you guys are looking at other products, or as you guys are building your products yourselves. My sense is that there is a new kind of like AI native designer developer being created right now, like that didn't exist before. And the only example I can think of, and Robin, you say, tell me if this is, have you talked at all about the kind of DPO, some of the DPO research that's been out there that we had talked about?
Not entirely sure. I get the connection, but
I guess here's my question. Here, I'll ask the question directly. It seems like some features of new products are built in the user interface, but many are built underneath the API. They're part of the model in order to make the product better, actually make the model better. I'm just curious for your sense of, are you all seeing that too? Are you guys seeing that in your own products? Are you seeing the products you're using? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, my intuition is that the model is a product in many cases, in the sense that I think to build a very differentiated, long-term, sustainable AI startup, it's better to be actually an AI builder and a model builder yourself. I feel like that's what OpenAI kind of like validated by being model builders and then releasing ChatGPT, arguably kind of like the most successful product of the last 10 years. And so my intuition is that long term, all the AI startups are really going to be AI builders and AI like model trainers, and that you're going to kind of like design your models the same way you would design your products today.
Have you all seen, does that resonate with you all too?
I think it resonates very much with me. Yeah, I agree with that. I know it's a huge debate, and I think there's also the complete opposite opinion on the spectrum that you have to be a product and UI UX interface developer first, and not so much of the value creation is in the model. But I tend to agree with Clem. I think ChatGPT is a great example of that, with the actually the chat interface being baked into the model, and then it's kind of the simplest way of interacting with it. And I think we will see that for a bunch of also other models, like visual models, the ones that we are working on. And I think, yeah, to the DPO point that you made, that's like DPO is a direct preference optimization. It's a technique for improving both language models, but also visual models, and very tightly that connects to the product that you build, that you have to basically add some way of comparing different outputs that your model can do, so you can incorporate feedback back into your model, which I would say, yeah, is one point of this, like, to your point of the AI native company.
And that's sort of, you know, if you were going to improve the product with a consumer, let's just take consumer product. I talked about Suno before, or DPO, is if you're going to improve the product, sometimes it feels like the improvement is in the UI. Even with ChatGPT, like it took them 3 years to figure out that that messaging interface was the right interface. I think that was, it feels obvious now, but it was like non-obvious at the beginning to me. Is that, you know, if as an example in the DPO, if you're going to improve how an image comes out, it might be in painting, which is a UI change, but that also flows all the way through to the model itself. And how are you incorporating the most recent improvements to be able to take that data and actually make the outcome product better? Is that, you know, are you all seeing that as well on the UI side, kind of flowing all the way through?
I think it's probably true. Like I look at like Cursor, for instance. What I was going to say is, like, I think workflow could be one moat, model could be one moat. If you have both, then you're even better. Like Cursor is an example of a company that's only a wrapper, arguably, but eventually they probably build their own model. I think ChatGPT is another good example, as you say. I don't know. Ideally, you get both over time. But I don't think it's necessity. I think you can also do like a very strong business that's just being a pure API.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I'm thinking you can definitely build a strong business at pure API. Do you almost have to be, if you're building an AI, we can discuss what AI native company means, but if you're building an AI native company, it almost feels like you have to at least be working on the model, and then may also need to be doing thinking about what that UI looks like. Have somebody who's thinking about that, not as what I'll call like a Web 2 designer, but somebody who really understands enough about the model to make it to get whatever the feedback happens to be in the UI, to be able to help people understand how to use the model.
I think there's like 3 different ways to monetize your own model. You can build a UI, like you said, in the workflow and consumer product. That's like one way. The other way is you can build an API business, and then the third way is to license the weights. But I think all 3 are like kind of decent. I think it's hard for me. It's hard to say which one has like, probably the UI has like the strongest moat if you can nail it. But the other 2 also seem like fine business models to me.
Any other open source business models that we're talking about? I mean, obviously licensing the API. I think Clem talked about this almost sort of virtuous cycle of what makes it positive to have to continue to be open. And we've seen some companies do that, some companies not do that as much. Any other, kind of, I guess, before we wrap up, any other models that you are seeing that you're sort of inspired by?
I suspect a lot of new ones are going to be invented. We're so early in AI monetization in general that, and what's interesting right now is that probably what companies were paying for in AI 2 years ago is very different than what they're paying for today, and it's probably going to be very different than what they will be paying for in 2 years. That also business models are going to evolve much faster than before, right? If you look at OpenAI, it's interesting, right? Like when before ChatGPT, they were like monetizing through API, right, as a pure B2B model, and now they're mainly monetizing B2C through subscriptions, right? So like the business model changes have been insane. I suspect that it's going to be the case for most AI companies. Like they're going to evolve their business model quite rapidly and kind of like change them and innovate on them also quite rapidly.
Awesome. Well, look, I really appreciate you all jumping on. This is I'm excited for the rest of the day. I was especially excited to ask you all these questions and to hear the questions you all had for each other, which is interesting to me. But hope everyone else stick around. I'm going to bring Becca back up, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.